So true, it's nothing like us.
The air inside the John household had never felt heavier. On most days, it carried the comforting aroma of home-cooked meals and the faint echoes of laughter and chatter. But today, it was different. A suffocating silence, interrupted only by muffled sobs. Mrs. John sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as they clutched the slip of paper that had arrived earlier that morning. The note bore no adornment, no excessive explanations, just the plain, unyielding words that felt like a dagger to her heart. Jungkook has been released from BTS, her youngest son, her pride and joy, her shining star, was no longer a part of the group that had become the heartbeat of millions worldwide. A group that had brought him unimaginable joy, unparalleled fame, and a sense of purpose she had once feared he might never find. Jungkook had been her baby boy, the golden child who had grown up too fast under the bright, unforgiving lights of fame. Now, it felt as though those lights had flickered out, leaving an abyss she couldn't fathom. She pressed her hand against her chest, where the ache throbbed like a wound. It wasn't until the phone rang that she realized how long she had been sitting in the stillness, staring blankly at the letter. Her husband's voice on the other end was calm, too calm, masking the tension that was undoubtedly gripping him as tightly as it gripped her. Mrs. John shook her head, even though he couldn't see her. No, not yet. I don't even know what to say. She hung up, her fingers lingering on the phone. Be there for him. It sounded simple enough, but as a mother, she knew the weight of those words. How could she be there for him when she felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under her? How could she offer him strength when her own heart was breaking? As she waited for Jungkook to return home, her mind wandered back to the beginning of it all. She remembered the day he had first told her about the audition. He had been so young, barely a teenager, yet his eyes had sparkled with a determination she hadn't understood at the time. "Are you sure about this?" she had asked him, her voice laced with both concern and disbelief. "It's a big step." Jungkook had nodded, his jaw set in that stubborn way she had come to recognize as a sign that he wouldn't back down. "I have to try, Mom. I feel like this is what I meant to do." And so, she had let him go. She had watched as he packed his dreams into a small suitcase and boarded a train to Seoul, leaving behind the comfort of their small-town life for the uncertainty of a world neither of them truly understood. She hadn't known then how much she would miss him, how much she would worry about him, or how proud she would be of the man he would become. All she had known was that she loved him too much to hold him back. The sound of the front door opening snapped her out of her reverie. She turned to see Jungkook standing in the doorway, his head bowed, his shoulders hunched under the weight of something invisible but unmistakably heavy. He looked up at her, and her heart broke all over again. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face pale and drawn. He looked like the little boy he had once been, the one who would run to her with scraped knees and tear-streaked cheeks, seeking comfort in her arms. She crossed the room in a heartbeat and pulled him into her arms. He didn't resist. Instead, he collapsed against her, his body racked with silent sobs. She held him tightly, her own tears falling freely as she whispered words of comfort she wasn't sure he could hear. "It's going to be okay," she murmured. "We'll get through this together." Later that night, as they sat at the kitchen table, Jungkook began to talk. Slowly, hesitantly, he opened up about the struggles he had faced, the pressure, the expectations, the relentless scrutiny of a world that often forgot he was just a human being. "I gave it everything, Mom," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "But it never felt like enough. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I sacrificed, it always felt like I was falling short." Mrs. John reached across the table and took his hand in hers. "You gave them your heart, Jungkook. That's more than enough." He shook his head. "But what about the fans? What about the members? I feel like I've let everyone down. "You haven't let anyone down," she said firmly. "You've given them so much, more than they could ever ask for. And now it's time for you to take care of yourself." In the days that followed, Mrs. John watched as Jungkook began to find his footing again. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the pain seemed too much to bear, moments when he questioned whether he had made the right decision. But slowly, with the support of his family and the unwavering love of those who truly knew him, he began to heal. He started writing music again, not for the charts or the fans, but for himself. He rediscovered the joy of creating, the simple pleasure of pouring his heart into something without the weight of expectation, and through it all, Mrs. John stood by his side, her heart swelling with pride as she watched her son rise from the ashes of his old life to embrace a new beginning. Years later, when Jungkook looked back on that time in his life, he would often say that it was his mother who had saved him. Her tears had mirrored his pain, her strength had bolstered his resolve, and her unwavering love had reminded him of who he truly was. For Mrs. John, the experience had been both the most painful and the most profound of her life. It had taught her that love was not about holding on, but about letting go. It was about standing by someone even when their world was falling apart, about believing in them even when they couldn't believe in themselves. And so, as she watched her son take the stage again, this time as a solo artist, his voice soaring with a freedom she had never seen before, she smiled through her tears, knowing that he had finally found his way. Because in the end, Jungkook was still her baby boy, still her pride and joy, still the shining star who had taught her the true meaning of love. This deep narrative story delves into the emotions and relationships behind the scenario, creating a rich tapestry of human experience. Let me know if you'd like to tweak or add any details. The days following Jungkook's departure from BTS were marked by a strange duality. On the surface, life seemed to move forward. Sunlight still spilled through the curtains, and the world outside the John household carried on with its usual rhythm. But within the walls of their home, time felt suspended, as though they were all holding their breath, waiting for something undefined. Jungkook spent most of his time in his childhood room, a space that hadn't changed much over the years. The posters of his early inspirations still adorned the walls, their edges slightly curled with age. His guitar sat in the corner, a silent reminder of the boy who had once dreamed of filling arenas with his music. For Mrs. John, it was bittersweet to see her son back in the room where it had all started. She often found herself lingering in the doorway, watching as he strummed absent-mindedly on his guitar or scribbled in his notebook.